Good afternoon. I trust I can be heard well enough. Yes? Okay. Well, good afternoon and a belated Happy Constitution Day to you all. My name is David Fott, and I'm a professor of political science and director of the Great Works Academic Certificate Program here at UNLV. The Great Works Academic Certificate Program exists to encourage undergraduates to spend as much time as they can with the greatest minds who ever lived. The program requires 12 credits of courses featuring primary sources written by authors on our 9-page list. And that list is available on our website, which you can find on the flyer we have distributed. And if you have not gotten a flyer, we have plenty of copies. So, Mr. Cervantes, do you still have the extras?
Yes.
Oh, they're over there. Okay, they're over there by the door. Yes, so please get one if you did not get one. The program is a way to certify, for undergraduates to certify, that they have taken, that you, undergraduates, have taken rigorous courses, and a way to impress graduate schools and employers. I won't say more about the program here, but feel free to contact me using the information on the flyer. We are here today because of Constitution Day, the day established by the U.S. Congress for celebrating the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17, 1787. I am most grateful that funding for today's lecture has come from the Jack Miller Center for Teaching America's Founding Principles and History. Among its programs, the Jack Miller Center provides grants so that colleges and universities, such as ours, may invite speakers around this time in September to address topics related to the Constitution. The Jack Miller Center has also provided for you a free pocket copy of the Constitution, and if you did not get one, again, they are over there by the flyers, so feel free to pick one up. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, a leading scholar in political philosophy, Timothy Burns, professor of political science and director of the graduate program at Baylor University. He is the author of the award-winning Shakespeare's Political Wisdom, also published in Chinese, and most recently, Leo Strauss on Democracy, Technology, and Liberal Education, as well as co-author of the Key Texts of Political Philosophy, An Introduction, which was also published in Chinese. He has edited or co-edited the books After History, Francis Fukuyama and His Critics, Recovering Reason, Essays in Honor of Thomas L. Pangle, The Future of Liberal Education, and Brill's companion to Leo Strauss Writings on Classical Political Thought. His articles have appeared in American Political Science Review, Journal of Politics, and other journals too numerous to mention. And then there are the chapters he has contributed to books, also too numerous to mention. Professor Burns is editor-in-chief of Interpretation, a journal of political philosophy, and co-editor of a series of books at Palgrave Macmillan entitled Recovering Political Philosophy. What is political philosophy recovering from? You might ask Professor Burns that question, and I bet you'll get a good answer. Professor Burns received his BA from Boston College and his MA and PhD from the University of Toronto. Currently, he is on leave from Baylor as the John and Daria Berry Visiting Research Scholar in the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. I think I've left a little bit of time for Professor Burns' lecture. His topic for today is Class and Race in the United States Constitution. And I will say that this lecture, as you can tell, I think is being recorded for eventual posting to YouTube. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Burns.
introduction. Thank you all for coming. Thank you especially to, again, Professor Meyer and Professor Mark Lutz for their kind invitation to join you for Constitution Day. We don't have a clicker, so I won't be able to click through these slides. I may have to look every so often at the screen, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. You all know that we in America had an extraordinary debate at the time of the ratification of our Constitution. You may have read some of the arguments on one side of that debate, the Federalist Papers. I'd like to speak to you a bit today about both the Federalists and their often neglected opponents, the Anti-Federalists, and about an important but neglected influence on the thought of the Anti-Federalists by someone of whom you may have heard, John Adams. We suspect you've heard of his second cousin, Samuel Adams. We'll be looking at the thought of Samuel's cousin, John. As you know, the American Constitution was drafted in 1787 in an attempt to correct the failing Articles of Confederation. But my story begins some 6 years before that, in 1781, in France, with a letter written by a man named Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, Baron de Lune. You've probably never heard of him either. But to see his importance, we might consider the fact that there are busts of only two men gracing the entrance of Jefferson's estate at Monticello, one of Voltaire and one of Turgot. Turgot was a political economist who served briefly under Louis XVI as finance minister, and he was an advocate of what we would today call classical liberal economics. Turgot's friend, Dr. Richard Price, an English champion of American independence, had written a work called Additional Observations on Civil Liberty. And Turgot read it. Turgot published a letter to Price, wrote a letter and then published it, in which he sharply criticized the 13 American state constitutions. And he criticized them for slavishly following the British in having 3 different branches of government. To Turgot, this division of government was a big mistake. Whereas he saw it, the division merely mimicked the class system of England, in which a monarch served as chief executive, landed aristocrats occupied the upper house of the legislature, and the commoners held the lower house. Such class-based systems, which rested on deep longings for political ambition and greatness, Turgot thought belonged to the past, emphatically to the past. Why? Because liberal ideas and modern commerce were undermining class, undermining hierarchical distinctions in favor of commercial republics, which promoted finance and trade rather than glory and honor, and destroyed aristocracies. Now, when John Adams read Turgot's published letter to Price, deeply annoyed, he sent a series of letters to his son, John Quincy Adams, attacking Turgot. And then he decided that it would be best to extend and publish those letters to his son, which he did under the title, The Defense of the Constitutions of the United States, 1786, 1787. That is, just before the new proposed American Constitution, 1787, came out. Adams sought in this work to defend the 13 states' constitutions. But his work decisively influenced how the new federal Constitution of 1787 came to be understood by many Americans. So, what did Adams argue against Turgot? Adams insisted that the American system of separation of powers and different branches did not slavishly copy the British system. The American system of separation of powers, Adams argued, allowed the representation of 3 natural classes. Classes that have been manifest not only in England, but throughout human history. Adams wrote a 450-page long book going through all of world history to make this claim. There are, you can see, 3 permanent natural classes. And he thereby, I'm going to argue, misled his readers concerning the nature of modern constitutions. Misled by John Adams, the Anti-Federalists expected that this new proposed constitution, the federal constitution, was designed to maintain a class-based system of representation. They attacked the new Constitution, not because it would be class-based, but rather because it would fail to maintain the 3 classes. Seeing their argument will help us to fully understand the radical nature of the Federalists' understanding, their opponents' understanding of the new Constitution, the American regime under which we still live. But to make our case, we need to first grasp, in outline, the arguments of Turgot's great predecessors in modern political philosophy. That is, John Locke and Baron de Montesquieu. You may not have heard of them, but they were architects of what is arguably the greatest social engineering project ever undertaken in human history. One that's come to be known as the Enlightenment. And they profoundly influenced both Turgot and, as we'll say, the Federalists. Let's look first at the argument of John Locke. Taking up where his proto-liberal predecessor Thomas Hobbes left off, Locke argues for inalienable, pre-political, natural rights, stressing over and against the Bible, stressing the poverty of our original condition, our original state of nature, as he calls it, and emphasizing the creation of government as a significant step, escape from that poverty. But even before he turns to the discussion of the creation of government, it's the second treatise, Locke shows that humans in the state of nature, before they have civil society, are capable of relieving their naturally impoverished condition. The means at our disposal to do that are, in the first place, human labor, encouraged by guarantees of the right to property. Second, money, as the means of overcoming the natural spoilage limitation on goods, thereby vastly increasing the desire for gain in human beings. Third, spread of the arts and sciences, as supplying additional human remedies, as Locke calls them, for the pains and impressions that we are under, that we experience in harsh nature, through technology, that is, and its conquering of nature. Fourth, markets, which both wages and prices of goods, in both the wages and the prices of goods are determined by supply and demand, rather than by allegedly natural wages and prices, natural prices. So those as the means of rationally distributing the goods and services that what Locke calls the industrious and rational human beings who have produced through their labor, physical and mental, those things that we don't have in the state of nature. Okay, so where Hobbes had defined the end of government as security and peace, Locke defines the end of government as the regulating and preserving of property. Freedom means for Locke primarily freedom to protect and preserve your material property, your private property, which Locke, in which he includes one's life and liberty. And in the fifth and most important chapter of the second treatise, Locke lays down the moral foundation of what we today call capitalism. Here he claims justice, the common good of all humanity, requires a society to devote itself chiefly to encouraging every individual to pursue limitless, self-interested acquisition of ever more and more private material possessions and economic buying power, that is, money, so long as each person respects the right of every other person to do likewise. In other words, Locke wholly rejects the arguments of ancient political philosopher Aristotle, medieval political theologian Thomas Aquinas, according to whom we must subordinate wealth and the pursuit of wealth to the life of virtue, and who see property as a mere tool, disdaining arguing against unlimited acquisition. Locke blows the lid off of that. He becomes the first to argue that peacefully competitive acquisition is, paradoxically, the core of a just and moral society. Unleash inquisitiveness, unleash greed, and you will serve the common good. Now, since our natural condition, according to Locke, is not one of abundance, but one of poverty, or one in which any uncultivated land is what Locke calls wasteland, reason tells us, he argues, to subdue the earth. How? By labor. And the invention of money overcomes the natural limitation of spoilage. And there's so many pumpkins you can eat before they rot. Money doesn't rot. Money never stinks. Money is something you can continue to accumulate. And because of that, Locke says, it causes our desire to suddenly explode. Money gives human beings a great incentive to enclose and cultivate through their labor the poor land given in a state of nature. And Locke argues that the productivity of land that's cultivated improves, he says, by a factor of 10. And then he says, well, it actually improves by a factor of 100. And then he says, no, actually it's 1,000. And then he finally says, you know what? Land left to itself is worthless, worthless. All value in that land comes from human labor. Nature supplies almost worthless materials. Since such productivity, through human labor and scientific manipulation of nature, that is, through technology, through those, what Locke calls the common stock of mankind, is increased quite dramatically. So here's the justification for capitalism, for markets, for avarice. Since everyone who pursues money by manufacturing, by cultivating land, and so on, since they add to the common stock of mankind, they're serving the common good. They're not intending to do so. They're intending to serve their own interests, but they are in fact serving the common good. So, the pursuit of wealth is something that improves the lot of everyone, lowering the prices of essential goods and services. No longer are there 10 apples brought to market by somebody, there are 100, no 1,000, no 10,000. If there are more apples at the market, the price of apples falls. So, a common good is served. A system like that, Locke admits, is going to result in vast inequality. So what you see on the screen now is 10% in the red, owning 90% of the wealth. But Locke argues, take a look at the tiny little graph on the left. That's the state of nature. There, 90% of the wealth is owned by 10%, same thing. Look how small the slice is for the 10%. That through human labor, through acquisition, through acquisitiveness, through the arts and sciences, human beings expand wealth. So a much bigger share, on the whole, is going to go to the 90% than did so before. All boats rise together, to use the favorite phrase of JFK, even for poor wage earners. So as a result, poverty becomes the key, property becomes the key right in Locke's political theory, as the government's role in protecting rights turns increasingly to an emphasis on protection of the right of private property. And the right of employment, as Locke said, that's the great art of government. And a wise prince would be sure, he says, by established laws of liberty to secure protection and encouragement to the honest industry of mankind. Government should strive to enhance incentives for working, rich, and poor, to make everyone see that they can hope by hard work to become more and more prosperous. In the face of the barrenness of nature, such acquisitiveness is not exploitative, because in fact, the greatest benefactors of mankind are the rationally self-interested, the inquisitive, the industrious. Okay, so Locke thereby lays out the moral justification of what we today call capitalism. The promotion of economic rationality through the practice of what he calls the great art of government. But he leaves the elaboration of this art and its consequences to his successors, the greatest among whom is Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu elaborates on the effects, especially of commerce on society, and the benefits that the state may derive from the effects of commerce. One of commerce's chief effects, according to Montesquieu, is gentleness or softness. That is, the dissolution, as he calls it, of severe, strict, disciplined habits, those that he calls, as the first to call, prejudices, and a corresponding encouragement of indifference to vice and attention to bodily pleasures and comforts. So, says Montesquieu, it is almost a general rule that wherever there are gentle ways of life, there's commerce, and wherever there's commerce, there are gentle ways of life. Instead of being devoted, that is, to your fatherland, to glory, or to the next life, one is inclined, by dint of the flourishing of commerce and all the material goods that it encourages you to consume, you become inclined to be attached instead to material security, material comforts, and entertainment, refined pleasures. In short, when private acquisition is available through trade, one becomes hardworking, tolerant, and peace-loving. Another thing about commerce, according to Montesquieu, is the commercial intercourse with foreigners and their habits weakens. Similarly, it weakens attachment to your own manner of life as the one right way of life. It causes each individual to understand his own customs as simply one way among many, or as prejudices. Strong or unbending attachment to one's own particular way of life comes to appear to be a result instead of mere narrowness. International commerce, in this way, enhances the belief that good and evil, noble and base, beautiful and ugly, those are no more than declarations of one's own subjective preferences. By encouraging acceptance of that principle, commerce encourages a cosmopolitanism based on recognition of what comes to sight as the true universal needs of humans. What's that? Material security and comfort. The movement of commercial nations trading with one another is, in this way, not only toward peace, it's also toward homogeneity. I bet you've never seen a bumper sticker that said, "Celebrate homogeneity." This is the origin of homogeneity, of what I guess we today still call the melting pot, which has become much discouraged. As nations increasingly emphasize their same natural, mutual, material needs, and as the pursuit of money, the means to satisfy those needs, as those grow, nations become similar to one another. In fact, coming to be guided by the pursuit of wealth, all come in Montesquieu's very striking formulation to be but a single state of which all societies are members. But in order to attain that peaceful homogeneity, that is, the homogeneity, the sameness to which commerce, manufacturing, riches, and luxury lead, it's necessary, Montesquieu argues, to destroy pure morals. It's necessary to destroy virtue. That is, it's necessary to destroy what classical republicanism aimed at, virtue. Commerce corrupts moral virtue. That's Montesquieu's argument. It commodifies. It sets a cash price on all goods and services, formerly done out of grace, out of generosity, out of hospitality, out of attachment to high-mindedness. It does so all the more wherever vanity and all that comes in its train, as Montesquieu puts it, that is, luxury, industry, the arts, fashions, politeness, taste, as those drive work and encourage the exchange of goods and services to new heights. This corroding of moral virtue is not an unfortunate side effect of commerce. It's the very end sought by Montesquieu in the promotion of commerce. Because Montesquieu holds that moral virtues are at odds with genuine human freedom and prosperity. Now, as the commercial republic is going to bring the atrophy, the falling away of classical virtues, and with it, the end of deep ambition for honor, for glory, for virtuous deeds, so too is this commercial republic intended to bring about the atrophy of faith in revealed religion. In the heart of the 2 chapters on religion and Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, one finds this extraordinary statement. Religion can be most successfully attacked. He's telling his readers, this is how you attack religion. It can be most successfully attacked, not by persecution, but, quote, by favor, by the conveniences of life, by hope of fortune, by that which makes one forget and throws one into lukewarmness, when other passions act on our souls, and those which religion inspires are in silence. Economic cooperation for satisfying material wants and needs and entertainment of pacified individuals, rather than principled stands taken on the basis of stern virtue or religious devotion or patriotism. That atrophy, that is, again, the very aim of Montesquieu's commercial republic. These are the central components, then, of the new modern commercial society, and what is more important, its aims. Wipe out the deep longings that had brought about distinct and competing notions of virtue, of religion, of ways of life. That's to be achieved by limited government, one that secures individual rights, especially property rights, the unleashing of human acquisitiveness, and commerce. This is the new Enlightenment project that Jacques Turgot, Baron de Lune, was following. So let's take a look at what he says. Turgot, too, envisions a withering of political ambition, a withering of the hunt for glory, a privatization, a softening of stern moral and religious life, and the eclipse by economic life of political life, understood as a life devoted to the cultivation of virtue. He had hoped that the republics that were being set up in America would eventually put an end to what he considered the deep, deluded longings that had hitherto animated political life. Turgot's letter to Price presents the judgment of the state constitutions in America that he arrived at, and that encapsulates the desire to see American republics emerge, which will be governed, as he puts it, by nature, by reason, and by justice. That is, he looks for governments in accord with the modern Lockean, Montesquieuian principles, but he finds the American state governments don't follow them, they're deficient. The American states, he complains, have thoughtlessly imitated the British system of separation of powers. They've adopted bicameral legislatures. They've adopted an independent executive. This system, he says, should be seen for what it is. It's a result of merely accidental historical circumstances under which the British king is balanced by Parliament, and Parliament itself, nobles, aristocrats on one hand, are balanced by the commoners. The American states, in which citizens are equal, have foolishly adopted this class-based system, and they've created divisions and instability where none naturally exist. The Americans have given insufficient attention to the fact that there are only 2 natural classes, property and non-property. That is, these classes are not permanent. The classes are economic classes, not social classes. There is upward and downward mobility in the 2 classes. Other classes, he argues, what other classes? Oh, these would include the virtuous, the wise, kings by divine right, the clergy, noble families, serfs, Brahmins. All of them are artificial, and they should be accorded no specific place in any constitutional arrangement. He claims that a new type of constitution is going to bring about the death of those artificial classes. A constitution built on the natural distinction between property and unproperty. Finally, Turgot complains that the American system, the states, state constitutions, are also foolishly attempting to regulate commerce amongst themselves. What should they be doing instead? Instituting free trade. Free trade, he says, is a natural corollary of the natural right to property. And Turgot sees very clearly that this argument has a momentous consequence. In a word, the nation state is finished. If the corollary concerning free trade is fully understood. Because, as he suggests, commerce and the private property on which it's based, left to itself, produces a natural homogeneity among peoples, and an equality of economic progress. If you leave each state to regulate its own commerce with others, you're going to perpetuate an artificial division of states. There's going to be diverse states. There'll be diverse laws. There'll be diverse manners, diverse opinions. Turgot finds that nature, which speaks universally, will, when followed, eliminate that diversity. It'll eliminate diverse hierarchies. It'll tear them down. It'll eliminate old-fashioned customs, prejudices, laws, manners, opinions. It will lead to a healthy, rational homogeneity. As he states, the nation state has no exalted end. It must simply preserve the freedom of individuals. The nation state has to protect the private property of individuals against the more domestic threats, against foreign threats. The nation state should therefore, he says, abandon its claim to glory. It should recognize that it has only a pretended interest, he says, in other things like conquest, like glory in arms, or even like the more pacific desire for the glory of excelling in arts and sciences. If the interests of a nation, he says, he repeats, if those are pretended interests, vigorously repeats that, it's because the territory of the nation doesn't belong to the nation. It belongs to individuals. It belongs to the individual proprietors of the soil. The state exists merely to serve those proprietors. So Turgot takes Montesquieu's thesis, as you can see, very far, showing the possibility of transcending all artificial natural divisions, born of delusional national desires for glory, and turning instead to rely on property rights and free trade to promote rational, peaceful cooperation. What would we today call globalization. This is planned. It didn't come about by accident. Turgot argues that states, like individuals, can be reduced in this way to the level of promoting bodily comfort through commerce. We're taking away from them those deeper longings and replacing them with softer, natural, rational, peaceful desires for material comfort. So here, an early proponent, as we can see today in its most advanced state in the European Union, here, liberal order favors peace over war, prosperity over glory, physical satisfaction of needs over spiritual responses to higher callings, and it favors classlessness. It is against this background of the commercial republic that we can now understand the fierce counter-arguments of John Adams and their effect on the debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, especially on the Anti-Federalists who followed Adams. So Turgot is among the most progressive critics of American constitutionalism at the time of the founding. John Adams is, with good reason, considered one of the more conservative and deeply devout Christian among the American founders, especially in matters of religion and ethics. In contrast to Turgot's belief that commerce can soften human nature, Adams had faith instead in an older version of human nature, an older version of political order, as something that would, he argued, produce dignity and virtuous citizens. It would lead to the development of morals and character in Americans. It would balance between what he considered three permanent classes. Unlike Turgot, Adams held that human progress was seen especially in the progress in education and society, in knowledge, and in virtue. The very thing that Montesquieu and Locke wanted to do away with, Adams wanted to retain, so it is the very end of government, virtue. And this progress, Adams claims, had come about because of advances in the theory of government, checks and balances, an independent judiciary, protection of rights to conscience, to free speech, to petition. If we can put Adams in context, we might say Adams viewed the modern science of politics as seeking the very same ends as ancient classical politics had sought. That is, the good life or virtue, but as employing new political means to attain them. Virtue, as Adams well knew, had been the goal of small republics. And employing the new means to that goal entailed doing something that would make those republics longer lived. They were all short-lived. The new science of politics, according to Adams, will extend the life of republics. And it will do so by introducing these things: representation, checks and balances, and a balance of powers in the government, or rather, a balance of three branches. Adams doesn't call it a balance of powers. It's three different branches, because the three branches of government, the executive is not the judiciary. The executive, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Branches and the checks on each branch found in the 13 American states are based on a correct understanding, Adams argues, of human nature and its three natural classes. By improving ancient political arrangements with this modern understanding, Adams believed new republics could be produced that would live a much longer period of time. Now, the balance that he's talking about is not between, as I say, powers. Balance instead, that is the balance of the executive and the two branches of the legislature, is between regimes. It's between types of people. It's between classes, what he sometimes calls orders of men. Aristocrats, Democrats, and monarchists. Those members of these three grand permanent classes, these three parties that you find everywhere, that promote a certain type of rule and indeed a way of life through legislation, that for Adams is the focus of the new science of government. And the progress of that science consists in how do you most effectively balance these three classes? The 13 American states have, according to Adams, created constitutions that do balance those three classes, those three permanent parties. They afford members of each natural class a share in rule. Adams saw the American executive, the bicameral legislature, as functioning as a complex mixed regime, one that he dubs a democratical mixture. Adams' understanding can be seen most clearly by his view of the Senate. This is some fairly amusing. Adams presents the Senate not as the Federalist. They say that's a chamber of sober second thought. Adams says it's a place for ostracism. That is, for getting rid of people. Who? The ambitious aristocrats. All of them are going to want to be president. He's sticking with the Senate. So we see that Adams actually agrees with Turgot, with his fundamental claim. That is, the branches of our state governments do indeed reflect three classes. But where Turgot had said, those classes, along with the nation state, are disappearing from human history, Adams says, they're not disappearing. Those classes are not going to be reduced to the property and non-property. They're not going to be reduced to economic classes. He denies that there will be this universal reduction of social classes. He argues with particular vigor there's always going to be an aristocratic class. You got to watch out for them. They think they deserve to rule. It's that ambitious type, aristocrats, above all, that have to be checked, he argues. They have to be checked for the sake of preserving another class, the class called the people. And Adams thinks that's the virtuous class. Unlike Turgot, Adams does not at all envision a withering of the hunt for glory. And while he condemns the monkery of Catholic priests, he does not foresee the privatization of moral and religious life. He does not foresee or encourage the eclipse of the political by the economic as the driving force of life. He doesn't think that republics that are being set up in America would end the deep longings that came to end political life. It's in part because Adams sees the end of government instead, not simply as liberal, not simply as stated in the Declaration of Independence, to secure certain rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but instead having as its end securing, as he puts it, of lives, liberties, properties, yes, and characters of the citizens. That Adams sees a natural place for merit or consideration of worth or virtue, deserving, as something that's going to endure in a new type of government. In his promotion of the new science of politics, we could say this: Adams is one of two things. He's either an unaware foot soldier, you could say, in radical enlightenment, doesn't know what he's advancing. Or it's possible that Adams does see where these things are going, and he wants to carve out within the modern regime the possibility of a Christian classical republic. His defense of the constitutions of the United States was, in any case, quite faithful. And it was faithful because it was widely read by the Anti-Federalists. Many of them explicitly cite Adams and his arguments about the three classes. They viewed Adams' book, that is, as the authoritative explanation of the proposed constitutional system of separate branches. The Anti-Federalists agreed with Adams that a regime that balanced what they called three co-equal orders would be beneficial. Many Anti-Federalists, notably federal farmer, Brutus, the signers of the Pennsylvania Minority Report, Agrippa, Langdon Smith, they agreed with Adams that the aristocratic elites and the democratic yeomanry should be represented in different branches of the government, balancing each other's worst impulses and helping to promote good government. But because none of these anti-federalists believed that the proposed Constitution would actually create such a balanced class system of government in practice, they rejected it. They rejected it for its failure to guarantee what they called the first of all among the political balances, that is, the preservation and proper station of each of these classes. Tellingly, the Anti-Federalists also favored small republics, in which a similarity of mores and the promotion of virtue is possible. Indeed, these Anti-Federalists thought, if we adopt a new constitution and don't preserve the states in their vigor, we'll have a consolidated republic. That is to say, something that's eventually going to lead to despotism. How's that? States as small republics, they thought, and schools of virtue encouraged manly virtue, the virtues of a free people, what they called good morals, religion, temperance, a moderate, healthy ambition, and avoidance of foreign mixtures. The Anti-Federalists believed that these virtues would come to fruition. Primarily, they said, in the substantial yeomanry of the country. The first men of the community, on the other hand, the aristocrats, would be licentious, assuming, and overbearing, where, especially among the slave-holding southern states. Brutus, citing the proposed Constitution's 3/5 clause, condemns the slave-holding aristocracy that he says, holds men in bondage in defiance of every idea of benevolence, of justice, and religion, and contrary to all principles of liberty. These arguments are clearly suffused with the dependence on Adams' understanding of the different classes or orders of men. Indeed, on the basis of Adams' book, the Anti-Federalists predicted the proposed Constitution is actually going to create what they called an aristocratical government, favoring rule by the wealthy and even tending toward hereditary offices. The Senate, they argued, would lean toward aristocracy by its prominence and position, and the president would presumably come from the same upper crust of the American society. And these two aristocratic institutions would further be united by the common function of the presidency and the Senate. The Constitution requires their close cooperation. And while the aristocratic and monarchic orders would be represented in the Senate in the person of the chief executive, the common people don't find represented as a class. Even large states would send fewer than a dozen members to the House, thereby guaranteeing the first men in the state, the aristocrats, would gain election. The class called the people would be excluded from office. America's democratic middle class would be shut out of government, and the aristocrats, only rarely coming into contact with the common man, would be detached from day-to-day concerns. As Brutus concluded, although the House was purported to be the Democratic branch, in truth, it offered little more than a shadow of representation. The capital city would be filled with great and mighty of the earth, and those lordly and high-minded rulers would sacrifice the public good to advance their own interests and positions. The people, the yeoman, the common yeoman could be well represented only if they could, according to Brutus, choose men from among themselves and genuinely like themselves. Wanted representation to reflect what America looked like. Wanted to reflect the fact that the yeoman farmers are there, and they should be represented by yeoman farmers. They should resemble, as he also put it, those they represent. They should be a true picture of the people. And the resulting involvement of the yeomanry would have tremendous benefits. It would bring the yeomanry into government. The community would benefit from the solid middling virtues maintained. So, in short, the Anti-Federalists adopted Adams' understanding of the three classes of government. They were especially afraid that without the yeomen being represented, those who were passing the laws, the aristocratic branch, would pass laws that didn't reflect anything of the yeomanry's soul, and so could only be enforced by a standing army, could only be enforced by soldiers. And so they predicted a standing army in the United States for the enforcement of its laws, something a free republic would never do. They predicted despotism. Now, having adopted Adams' understanding of balanced representation of three permanent classes, they rejected the Constitution of the Federalists. They thought it would fail because the natural classes that it was supposed to represent would not be represented. Now, from Adams and the Anti-Federalists, returning now to the final chapter in the story, the Federalist Papers. The answer to the Anti-Federalists charges that the new Constitution would result in aristocracy and despotism. The Federalists didn't do what we might have expected them to do. They didn't directly confront the Anti-Federalists. They didn't say, your notion of balanced classes is crazy. It's out of date. It doesn't make sense. Instead of defending the new Constitution and saying, wait, our new Constitution is going to guarantee that all three classes are represented. Instead of taking either of those two paths, the Federalists instead, and it's easy, it's important, but it's easy to miss this point. The Federalists did not directly address the question of class. They argued instead for an understanding of the proposed Constitution based on a Lockean, Montesquieuian conception of property, of commerce, and modern government, one that was much closer to that of Turgot than to Adams. So, rejecting the Anti-Federalists' claims that the new government would promote a class-based aristocracy, and the Federalists attacked the Anti-Federalists. They attacked their understanding of representation at its core. They quietly rejected their contention that government should directly represent all the different classes of men. They directly or indirectly rejected the claim that there should be a production of sympathy between representative bodies and constituents. They argued that a modern commercial regime is going to allow individuals to transcend class interests and to create unity among economic interests. Most critically, the Federalists show that modern commerce is going to unite all citizens around a single goal. What's that? What do you suppose it is? If they're following Locke and Montesquieu. Money making. That's the goal. They would thereby create a broad-based share of economic interests. So they adopted much of the Lockean Montesquieuian argument. They proposed a system that strove to bring about a leveling of classes, peace and stability that comes from the modern commercial republic. As they write in Federalist 9, the United States has learned the lessons of the history of petty republics of Greece and Italy. Despite their fleeting brilliancy, they claim those republics were continually plagued by domestic faction and insurrection. We now have the modern science of politics. It's going to allow us to do away with those kinds of things. It's developed models of a more perfect structure, something not known to the ancients. Just dig at atoms. These great improvements in the new science of politics. What are they? Separation of powers, legislative checks and balances, an independent judiciary. We're familiar with these. Representative government, we're familiar with that. Most importantly, something we might overlook, that they thought was the most important, and that is the enlargement, they call the enlargement of the orbit, the extending of the sphere of government. And this is famously expounded in Federalist Paper number 10, which along with 51, are the two most famous of the Federalist Papers. In embracing an extended republic, they looked toward something unprecedented. There had never been an extended republic in human history. All republics have been small. They argued this new constitution rejects what used to be. This new constitution rejects a blind veneration of antiquity. It looks to a regime which has no parallel in the annals of human society. And critical to this new experiment is the role of free commerce, which helps to avoid the petty factional conflicts of the ancient republics. How does it do that? It turns citizens away from the deep-seated desire for virtue, glory, moral excellence. It turns them instead toward the infinitely safer desire for profit, for money. The proposed Constitution of the United States clearly lays the groundwork for a commercial republic. What appears on the screen right now is the only place in the unamended American Constitution where the word right appears, and that is in the clause concerning patents and copyrights. To promote the progress of science and useful arts. Why do we have to do that? Because nature is an impoverished place, because the arts and sciences transform what's natural, because technology is needed to get us out of the state of nature. All of this is assumed by the Constitution. And notice what this clause does. It says, if somebody comes up with a cure for polio, a cure for cancer, let them have a patent on it. What does that mean? They can make money. They can be the exclusive holder of the patent for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever Congress decides. The clause, in other words, incentivizes self-interest, and thereby, through incentivizing inquisitiveness, hopes to guarantee something that will be for the common.
The proposed United States Constitution clearly laid the groundwork for a commercial republic. Prior to the addition of the Bill of Rights, the sole mention of rights in the unamended document was with reference to Congress's power to promote, quote, the progress of science and useful arts, end quote, by protecting patents and copyrights. Second, the economic powers granted to Congress in combination with the powers specifically denied the states, all but guaranteed free trade and promoted centralized control over the nation's economy. Congress is given broad tax powers to impose duties on imports, the power to regulate interstate and foreign commerce, to fix standard weights and measures, to coin money and regulate its value, and to enact uniform rules for bankruptcies. The 13 states, in contrast, lost the authority to coin or print money, lay duties on imports or exports, except in very limited circumstances, or impair the obligations of contracts. Finally, the Constitution forbade taxes or duties on the export of states and banned preferential regulations which would benefit one state or its shipping over another. These powers, as Forrest MacDonald says, enshrined in fundamental law a broad, modern conception of contracts, allowed Congress to promote manufacturing through protective tariffs, and ensured that no matter what system of political economy was adopted, internally, the United States would be the largest area of free trade in the world. The Federalists pointed to the many benefits of a single, united government with broad powers to control foreign and internal commerce, advantageous trade relations with Europe, promotion of a robust, diversified American economy, and sufficient power to ensure American access to the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Moreover, a union that encompassed commercial unity would discourage jealousy and harmful rivalry among the states, while encouraging increased trade. Quote, unrestrained intercourse between the states would guarantee that the veins of commerce in every part will be replenished and will acquire additional motion and vigor from the free circulation of the commodities of every part, advancing trade at home and abroad. Tellingly, to the Federalists, these commercial benefits were central, not ancillary, to the constitutional project. Indeed, promotion of commerce would become one of the nation's primary objectives. They put this very strikingly and directly, saying that in the realm of modern politics, the prosperity of commerce has become a primary object of the political cares of enlightened statesmen. Following Locke, that is, the Federalists believed that the promotion of commercial success was a significant part of the modern great art of government. Notably, the Federalists explicitly align this great art with the project of unleashing mankind's avarice. The union of the states, in addition to the freedom and property rights guaranteed by the Constitution, would encourage a beneficial acquisitiveness, as they put it, by multiplying the means of gratification, by promoting the introduction and circulation of the precious metals, those darling objects of human avarice and enterprise. Commerce serves to vivify and invigorate all the channels of industry and to make them flow with greater activity and copiousness. It is by promoting this gratification of human avarice that the country is benefited, as the the unequaled spirit of enterprise and the genius of the American merchants and navigators is unleashed through the modern commerce. Now, this Lockean praise of enterprise promoting money is striking, but equally important is what the commercial republic is said to mean concerning the orders of men. Adam's three orders or classes are quietly replaced by the assiduous merchant, the laborious husbandman, the active mechanic, and the industrious manufacturer. Everyone, that is working for money. There will be no leisured aristocratic nor monarchic class in this new republic. and each order is defined by its job classification. Economic interests would replace what Adams had considered to be permanent and static social classes. It's because of this uniting interest in profit, which undermines traditional class distinctions, that the Federalists so easily disregard the Anti-Federalist demand for mirrored representation. While the Anti-Federalists insisted that representatives must share a common way of life with their constituents, Federalist 35 contends that people do not even wish to vote for men like themselves, but will consistently choose those with superior political ability, those most capable of navigating the legislative process. Mechanics and manufacturers, he argues, will not support the election of other manufacturers or mechanics, but will always be inclined to give their votes to merchants in preference to persons of their own professions or trade, because their interests can be more effectually promoted by the merchants, whose influence and weight and superior acquirements render them more equal to a contest in the public councils. The Federalists did not expect a mechanic, for example, to promote the good of some economic interest at the expense of his own. But they did predict that a mechanic might recognize that he would benefit more by the election of a merchant skilled in the political arts than by the election of another mechanic. Interests drive men, but skills advance interests. Even more importantly, Publius saw that the issue went far beyond the skill of the political candidate in parliamentary procedure. A mechanic might vote for a merchant, trusting the merchant to advance his interests, because he knows that their economic interests are intertwined. Representatives, without holding the very same interests as their constituents, would nevertheless have interests intimately blended and interwoven with those of their constituents, thereby all but guaranteeing that their self-interest would drive them to protect both their own economic interests and the interests of those they represent. Thus, the Federalists argued that self-interest and self-love will help to promote good government. The Anti-Federalists had a notion of interests that was so narrowly focused on class interests that it failed to account for a complex modern economy in which various commercial interests are closely connected and interreliant. Now, the process of transcending regime-based divisions or classes begins by showing that all humans are united by a common interest, money, and moves to show how a modern commercial republic intimately intertwines various modes of money-making. To further complicate the process, Federalist 10 famously elaborates on this argument concerning control of factions by extending the sphere of popular government. Although Federalist 10 is remembered for its emphasis on property-based factions, it is other factions, factions based on deep longings, which trouble the Federalists the most. Attachment to a particular religion, form of government, or to different leaders create dangerous factional conflicts, inflaming the citizenry with mutual animosity and enkindling the most violent conflicts and oppression. It is these sorts of factional conflicts, based on deep-seated, impassioned views that rest on a foundation prior to or beyond reason, that the Federalists believe aroused the most violent internecine conflicts, and multiplying the number of economic commercial interests through a large-scale republic will draw upon the pacifying nature of trade to ameliorate these more deadly forms of factional conflict. Property-based factions are the most manageable precisely because they rely on rational self-interest. As the Federalists argue, the uniting factor between all classes or orders of men is love of wealth. All look forward with eager expectation and growing alacrity to this pleasing reward for their toils. And neither side must, in order to attain that wealth, devote itself to the destruction of the other. The rich want simply to remain rich. The poor want to join the rich in their success. All factions seek money. All may accumulate more through vigorous modern commerce. The faithful handmaid of labor and industry in every shape. Cooperation, rather than bloodletting, is the proper outlet for the energies of commercial competitors. And an extended republic will ensure a plurality of small economic interests. The Federalists also recognize the benefits that flow from the vast fluidity and interconnectedness of a modern economy. Not only will the membership of these economic classes change as individuals shift between them, and new generations and circumstances alter the relative influence of each, but the alliances between classes will vary over time. The fluidity of a modern economy will allow a vast variety of constantly shifting coalitions. Coalitions formed by both, quote, the possession of different degrees of property, quote, and the possession of different kinds of property. A laborer working in manufacture will recognize his common interest with other laborers in every field. But he will also recognize that he's intimately tied to the interests of everyone engaged in manufacture, from his employer to moneyed investors or wealthy carriers of manufactured goods. The Federalists proposed factions that would undermine both rigid classes and rigid factions, creating shifting coalitions of economic interests that will form the many small, diverse factions that block each other and prevent majority tyranny. As Martin Diamond points out, the Federalists envisioned a society in which, quote, men will tend to think in terms of their various immediate economic interests, that is, to think as members of an interest group rather than of a class. Classes, as understood in the older, more traditional sense, would disappear. Every man, regardless of his economic interests, would be essentially equal as a member of, quote, the great body of the people, as the Federalists called it. By replacing social classes with economic and interest-based groups, the Federalists quietly rejected Adams' argument and suggested that Turgot was correct, for the United States would overcome the old classes and allow greater social mobility and economic freedom. Relatedly, the Federalists do not promise that the new Constitution will successfully promote stern, rigorous Republican virtues. Instead, the Federalist argument for a commercial republic showed how modern commerce and a plurality of small economic factions can reduce the risk of majority tyranny and promote peaceful cooperation, even between citizens animated by self-interest. Let me conclude this story. The discourse between Turgot and Adams points to two positions that exerted significant influence over the ratification debate of 1787 to 89. Adams' argument looks back to an ancient understanding of politics. Because of Adams' misunderstanding of American constitutionalism, the Anti-Federalists presented lengthy diatribes against a perceived threat of aristocratic government. In this, they were misled, and their critique missed the point. The Federalist had something altogether different in mind. The new science of politics of Locke and Montesquieu would provide a novel and more stable foundation for free and limited government. a modern commercial republic will unleash the acquisitiveness of humans, overcoming traditional class boundaries and replacing them with the complex relationships that come with economic deal-making and competition. Class interests would be replaced by fluid economic interests as a result of the economic freedom and upward and downward mobility promised by the commercial republic. Had the Anti-Federalists more fully understood what was at stake, had they better understood how the argument for a modern, classless commercial republic had been accepted by the Federalists, they might have presented a very different argument, more pointed in its critique of luxury, trade, and intermixture with foreign nations. They might have been able to produce a keen critique of the modern commercial republic. Indeed, they might even have won